Have you ever stood in a room full of people who shared your last name and still felt completely alone? I have. The day my family disowned me wasn't the day I lost everything. It was the day I realized that some people only call you family when your pockets are full. My name is Ethan. 5 years ago, I believed that family would always stand beside you no matter what happened. I was wrong. It all started after my small construction business failed. For years, I had worked from sunrise until late at night, hoping to build something my parents would be proud of. I borrowed money, took risks, and gave every bit of energy I had. But when the economy slowed down, contracts disappeared one after another. Within months, I had lost almost everything. I sold my truck first, then my tools, then the tiny apartment I had spent years saving for. I kept telling myself it was only temporary. I believed I could start again. I believed my family would help me get back on my feet. Instead, they became strangers. One Sunday, my mother called and invited me to dinner. "The whole family will be here," she said. "We should talk." For the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful. Maybe they wanted to encourage me. Maybe they had finally realized I needed support more than criticism. I couldn't have been more wrong. The moment I walked into my parents' beautiful house, I noticed the silence. My older brother, Daniel, barely looked at me. My sister smiled politely, but it wasn't real. My father sat at the head of the table with his arms crossed, his face as cold as stone. Dinner lasted less than 15 minutes before my father cleared his throat. "Ethan," he said, "we need to talk about your future." I nodded quietly. He leaned forward. "No one in this family wants to keep cleaning up your mistakes." His words hit harder than I expected. "I never asked anyone to pay my debts," I replied softly. "I just need a little time." Daniel laughed under his breath. "Time," he said. "You've been saying that for months." I looked around the table, hoping someone would defend me. No one did. My mother avoided my eyes. My sister stared at her plate. Then my father said the sentence I'll never forget. "You've become an embarrassment to this family." The room felt smaller. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. He continued, "From today on, don't expect anything from us. No money, no support, and honestly, don't come back until you've fixed your life." Every heartbeat felt louder than the last. I stood up slowly. "So that's it?" I asked. "After everything we've been through together?" No one answered. The silence gave me the answer I never wanted. I picked up my old jacket and walked toward the front door. Just before leaving, I turned around one last time. "I hope none of you ever knows what it feels like to be abandoned by the people you're supposed to trust." Still, no one stopped me. The door closed behind me with a quiet click. That sound echoed in my mind all night. Standing alone on the sidewalk with nothing but a worn backpack, I realized I had lost more than my business. I had lost my family. What I didn't know then was that this painful goodbye wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a journey that would change every one of our lives. And one day, the very people who turned their backs on me would have no choice but to come knocking on my door. The first few weeks after leaving my parents' house were the hardest days of my life. I slept wherever I could. Some nights it was in my old car. Other nights, when I couldn't afford gas or parking, I stayed in a small shelter on the edge of town. I never imagined my life would come to this. Just months earlier, I had owned a business. Now, I was counting every dollar just to buy a sandwich. Every morning, I woke up with the same promise: don't give up today. It was the only thing keeping me moving. I spent hours walking from one business to another, asking if they needed workers. Most people didn't even let me finish my sentence. "We're not hiring. Leave your resume. We'll call you." No one ever did. The hardest part wasn't being poor. It was feeling invisible. People who used to shake my hand at business meetings now looked through me as if I didn't exist. Friends stopped answering my calls. Even relatives who once praised my hard work suddenly acted like they had never known me. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on a park bench with only $12 left in my pocket. I stared at the money for a long time. I could buy lunch, or I could save it for tomorrow. I chose tomorrow. That evening, my stomach growled so loudly that I laughed at myself. "If you're still making jokes," I whispered, "maybe you're not beaten yet." The next morning, I noticed a small sign outside a neighborhood hardware store. "Help wanted, part-time." I walked inside before anyone else could. The owner, an older man named Mr. Harris, looked at my worn-out shoes and tired face. For a moment, I thought he was going to turn me away like everyone else. Instead, he asked a simple question. "Can you work hard?" I answered without thinking. "I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired." He studied me for a few seconds, then smiled. "Be here tomorrow at 7. That single sentence felt like someone had opened a window after months of darkness. The pay wasn't much, but I didn't care. I unloaded trucks, stacked shelves, swept floors, and helped customers carry heavy boxes to their cars. By the end of every shift, my back ached and my hands were covered in dust. But every dollar I earned felt honest. Mr. Harris noticed that I never complained. One evening, as we were locking up the store, he handed me a cold bottle of water. "You know," he said, "I've owned this place for 30 years. I've hired hundreds of people." I looked at him curiously. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "My younger self." I smiled for the first time in weeks, he continued. "Life can knock a man down. That's normal. What matters is whether he gets back up." Those words stayed with me long after I left the store. For the first time since losing everything, I stopped thinking about what my family had taken from me. Instead, I started thinking about what I could still build. I rented the smallest room I could find. It wasn't much bigger than a storage space, but it had a bed, a window, and a door that locked. To me, it felt like a palace. Every payday, I saved a little money. No expensive meals, no new clothes, no excuses. Slowly, my confidence began to return. I wasn't rich, I wasn't successful, but I was moving forward one small step at a time. I had no idea that those small steps were leading me toward a future my family could never have imagined. And one day, the people who believed I would never recover would be forced to face the man they had given up on. Working at Mr. Harris's hardware store didn't make me rich, but it gave me something I had almost lost: hope. For nearly a year, I followed the same routine. I woke up before sunrise, worked until evening, went home to my tiny room, and spent my nights reading business books or watching free online lessons. I promised myself that if life ever gave me another chance, I wouldn't waste it. Mr. Harris noticed. One afternoon, after we closed the store, he walked over and placed a folder on the counter. "I think you're ready for something bigger," he said. I looked at him, confused. Inside the folder was the contact information for one of his longtime customers, a successful property developer named Victor Reynolds. "He needs someone honest to help manage renovation projects," Mr. Harris explained. "I told him about you." I froze. "You recommended me?" He smiled. "You earned it." The next morning, I walked into Victor's office wearing the only dress shirt I owned. It had been ironed so many times that the fabric was starting to fade, but it was clean, and I stood as confidently as I could. Victor glanced at my resume. "I noticed your business failed," he said. "Most people would have hidden that part of their past." "I didn't." "Yes," I answered. "It did." He leaned back in his chair. "So why should I trust you with my projects?" I took a deep breath. "Because I know what failure feels like. I also know I never want to experience it again. I won't take this opportunity for granted." For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then he smiled. "When can you start?" I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "Tomorrow," I replied. My new job changed everything. I wasn't sitting behind a desk. I was visiting construction sites, checking materials, solving problems, and making sure every project stayed on schedule. Every day taught me something new. Instead of feeling embarrassed by my past, I used it. I knew exactly how costly small mistakes could become because I had made many of them myself. Within months, Victor trusted me with bigger responsibilities. One evening, He called me into his office. "I've been watching you," he said. I wondered if I had done something wrong. Instead, he handed me a set of keys. "What are these?" I asked. "A company vehicle," he replied. "You've earned it." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Just 2 years earlier, I had sold my old truck to pay my bills. Now I was holding the keys to a new beginning. I drove home that night with tears in my eyes, not because of the car, because someone believed in me again. From that day forward, I worked even harder. I arrived first, I left last. Whenever a project faced problems, I volunteered to fix them. People started noticing soon. Clients were asking for me by name. 3 years passed faster than I expected. Victor eventually offered me a partnership in a new construction company. It was a risk, but this time I wasn't driven by pride. I was driven by experience. Together, we built a business known for honesty, quality, and keeping promises. The profits slowly grew. I moved into a comfortable home, bought reliable vehicles, and, for the first time in years, stopped worrying every time my phone rang. Money no longer controlled my life, but neither did anger. People often asked if I hated my family for what they had done. The truth surprised even me. I didn't spend my days planning revenge. I simply refused to let the people who abandoned me decide how my story would end. I focused on becoming the man they never believed I could be. Little did I know, while my life was finally coming together, my family's perfect world was quietly falling apart, and before long, they would remember the son they had so easily forgotten. 5 years passed. In that time, my life changed more than I had ever imagined. Our construction company had grown from a small business into one of the most trusted firms in the city. We weren't the biggest company, but people respected us because we kept our word. That reputation meant more to me than any amount of money. I finally had a home I was proud of. Every morning, I looked out the kitchen window with a quiet smile. There were no expensive decorations or flashy cars parked outside. I had learned that real success wasn't about showing people how much you had. It was about never having to worry if tomorrow would take everything away again. One Friday afternoon, I was finishing paperwork when my phone rang. The number wasn't saved. Normally, I ignored unknown calls. For some reason, I answered. "Hello." There was silence for a few seconds. Then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Ethan?" My heart skipped a beat. It was my mother. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "It's been a long time," she finally whispered. "Yes," I replied calmly. "It has." She sounded nervous, nothing like the confident woman I remembered. "How have you been?" It was a strange question, 5 years of silence, and that was how she wanted to begin. "I've been doing well," I answered. "I'm glad to hear that." Another long silence followed. Then she finally said the words I knew were coming. We need to talk. Not "I miss you." Not "I'm sorry," just. "We need to talk." I looked out my office window. "What is this really about, Mom?" Her voice trembled. "Your father isn't doing well." "What happened?" "Our family business failed." I closed my eyes. The same business my father always claimed would make our family powerful forever. The same business he had once told me I wasn't worthy of being part of. "What do you mean it failed?" I asked. She sighed deeply. "A few bad investments, trusted partners who disappeared, loans we couldn't repay." Everything she described sounded painfully familiar. It was almost the same story I had lived through years earlier, except when it happened to me, no one had offered a helping hand. "We're losing the house," she admitted quietly. "And Daniel?" "He tried to save the business, but things only became worse." I didn't know what to say. Not because I felt angry, because life had a strange way of coming full circle. Then she spoke the sentence I never expected to hear. "Ethan, we need your help." Those 4 words carried the weight of 5 years. I remembered standing in my parents' dining room. I remembered my father's cold voice. "Don't come back until you've fixed your life." Well, I had, but not because of them. "I'll think about it," I said. Before she could answer, another voice came through the phone. "Ethan." It was my father. His voice sounded older, weaker. "I know I don't deserve your time," he said. "I treated you terribly." I stayed silent. "I thought money made a family strong," he continued. I was wrong. For the first time in my life, I heard regret in his voice, not pride, not anger. Regret. "We're meeting tomorrow," he said softly. "Please just come." The call ended. I sat alone in my office for nearly an hour. Part of me wanted to ignore them. After all, they had ignored me when I needed them most. Another part of me remembered the man Mr. Harris had once been. He had helped a stranger without asking what he could gain. Maybe that was the difference between successful people and bitter people. Success gives you choices. Bitterness only keeps old wounds alive. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. The mansion that had once looked perfect now seemed tired. The paint was fading, the garden was overgrown. Even the front gate hung slightly open. It no longer looked like the proud home I had walked away from years ago. I parked my car and slowly walked to the front door. Before I could knock, it opened. My mother stood there. For a moment, she simply stared at me. Then tears filled her eyes. "You've changed," she whispered. I smiled politely. "So have all of you." Behind her, I could see my father sitting quietly in the living room. My brother Daniel looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. The same people who once made me feel worthless now looked at me with hope. For the first time, they didn't see the poor son they had rejected. They saw the only person who could save them. But they still didn't know one thing. I hadn't come to rescue their money. I had come to find out whether they truly regretted losing their family, or whether they only regretted losing everything else. I stepped into the living room and looked at the people who had once made me feel like I didn't belong. 5 years ago, I had walked out of this same house with nothing but a backpack and a broken heart. Now I walked in wearing a simple suit, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because life had finally rewarded years of hard work. For a few moments, no one spoke. Finally, my father stood up. His shoulders were lower than I remembered. His confident voice had disappeared. "Ethan," he said quietly, "thank you for coming." I nodded but didn't answer. He took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology." Those were words I had waited years to hear. "When your business failed," he continued, "I judged you instead of helping you. I thought success made someone valuable. I was wrong." My mother wiped away tears. "We should have stood beside you," she whispered. "Instead, we turned our backs on our own son." Daniel looked at me for the first time. "I laughed at you," he admitted. "I was arrogant. I thought I would never lose what I had." His voice cracked. "I was wrong, too." The room fell silent again. I looked at each of them, remembering every painful moment from that night years ago. The cold stares, the silence, the words that had followed me for years. "You've become an embarrassment to this family." I could still hear them. My father slowly pushed a folder across the coffee table. "Our debts," he said. Inside were unpaid loans, overdue bills, and legal notices. "If we lose the house," my mother said softly, "we'll have nowhere to go." They weren't asking for luxury anymore. They were asking for a second chance. The same second chance I had begged for years earlier. I closed the folder. "You know," I said calmly, "for a long time I imagined this moment. Everyone looked at me. I thought that if you ever needed me, I'd make you feel exactly the way you made me feel." No one interrupted, but something changed. I smiled slightly. The people who helped me when I had nothing never asked what I could give them in return. I thought about Mr. Harris. I thought about Victor. Neither of them cared how much money I had. They only cared about the kind of man I wanted to become. "I don't want revenge anymore," I said. "I want peace." Tears rolled down my mother's face. My father lowered his head. I reached into my briefcase and placed another folder on the table. "This isn't a check," I explained. "It's a plan." Daniel looked confused. "A plan?" I nodded. "I'll pay off the debts that keep you from losing the house." Everyone's eyes widened. "But," I continued, "I'm not giving anyone free money." My father looked up. What do you mean? I've learned something over the past 5 years. Money can disappear, success can disappear, but character stays with you. I pointed toward the folder. I've arranged jobs for both of you in one of my company's community projects. Daniel blinked. You want us to work? Yes, no special treatment, no family privilege. You'll earn your future the same way I earned mine. For a second, nobody spoke. Then my father surprised me. He smiled, a small, tired smile. I accept. Daniel nodded. So do I. For the first time in years, I felt something I never expected. The weight I had carried inside me was finally gone. Over the next several months, everything slowly changed. My father worked in the office, helping organize project records. He wasn't the boss anymore, and strangely, he seemed happier. Daniel supervised equipment deliveries and learned to respect every worker on the site. He often told new employees, never judge someone because they're struggling today. Tomorrow, your lives could be completely different. My mother volunteered at a local food bank every weekend. She often said helping others reminded her of the son she almost lost. As for me, I kept running my business, but my greatest success wasn't the buildings we completed. It was rebuilding something far more valuable: trust. One evening, our family gathered for dinner, not because anyone needed money, not because someone wanted a favor, simply because we wanted to be together. Halfway through the meal, my father looked at me. I used to think wealth made a man successful, he said, but watching you taught me something. What? I asked. He smiled. A poor man can become rich, but a rich man without kindness is already poor. The room grew quiet. This time, it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was peaceful. As I looked around the table, I realized something important. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It frees you from carrying it forever. If I had chosen revenge, I might have won for a moment. But by choosing wisdom, I gained something much greater: a future. Life has a strange way of testing people. Sometimes you're the one asking for help. Sometimes you're the one being asked. When that day comes, remember this: money can build houses, success can build businesses, but only love, humility, and forgiveness can build a family. And that's the lesson my family and I will never forget.